After my husband hit me that night, I made the best breakfast he'd ever seen. He thought it was forgiveness, but when he saw who was sitting at the table, he realized it was the beginning of the end. Before I go on, write in the comments which country you're watching me from and how old you are. I'll never forget the exact moment something flipped inside me, like an invisible piece finally sliding into the right place after years stuck. It was 3:29 a.m. when I took the photo of the bruise, my phone camera shaking slightly as I tried to keep it in focus. The cold bathroom light made my skin even paler, and the purple was starting to spread like ink seeping under the surface. The blood throbbed in a way that felt like it was talking to me, pulsing out words I had never been able to say out loud. Enough. Stop. No more. I knew that if I didn't document that moment, maybe later I myself would doubt how serious it was. He'd always been very good at convincing me my memory was weak, that I exaggerated, that I misread everything. So I took the phone firmly in my hand, took a deep breath, and snapped 3 photos, one after the other, each one sharper than the last. I sent the images to myself, to my personal email, to Riley, and to a secret folder I kept on Google Drive called For When I'm Ready. When I went back to the bedroom, Dylan's breathing was heavy, almost guttural, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just shoved me into the wall hard enough to crack the corner of the drywall. He always slept well after hurting me. I, on the other hand, would lie awake for hours, my heart scraping around inside my chest. But that night, something changed. Instead of curling up on my side of the bed and waiting for the morning, I got dressed slowly, washed my face, put on an old hoodie, and went downstairs in silence, feeling the wooden floor creak under my bare feet. The kitchen looked like an abandoned set in the middle of the night, dark, lit only by the flicker of the street lamp coming through the window. I leaned my hands on the marble counter for a few seconds, trying to steady my breathing. My head hurt, my body shook in waves, but for the first time I wasn't trembling from fear. It was something else. It felt like my body was rearranging itself to survive, to fight. I opened the notebook that was hidden behind the shelf of cookbooks, a notebook with a blue fabric cover Dylan had never seen. And I started to write exact time, what happened, what he said, where in the house we were. I'd done this before, but never with that level of precision. That dawn demanded surgical care. I wrote until my handwriting changed, until my hand stopped shaking. Then I set my phone up on the counter, propped against the flour tin, and recorded a short video. My swollen face, my low but steady voice. I described everything. I put the file in the secret folder and sent it to Riley, even knowing she'd only see it in the morning. She'd been my best friend since high school, now a brilliant attorney who always said I didn't have to face this alone. When I finished, I looked around the kitchen and noticed something strange. I was hungry. Not hungry for food, hungry for life. Hungry to do something that would give my body a little bit of control back. That's when the insane idea came. I opened the pantry, grabbed flour, eggs, sugar, butter. My hands moved automatically, like I was following invisible instructions. I started making pancakes, the recipe he loved the most, the one I only made on sunny Sundays, on those days when he seemed like another man, a sweet, gentle, smiling man, the man I thought I had chosen. Pouring the batter into the hot pan felt like sealing a silent pact with myself. The butter melted with a soft, comforting sound as the batter spread and began to bubble. I flipped each pancake carefully, as if I were building an altar to something bigger than I could understand at that moment. As I cooked, the smell filled the kitchen, drifted up the stairs, slipped into the bedroom. I knew Dylan would wake up to that. He always came down pulled by the smell of pancakes, thinking I was trying to make up for something. And I was, just not for what he imagined. When I heard his heavy footsteps upstairs, my stomach clenched, but not from fear. It felt like everything was finally falling into place, like the whole house was breathing with me, quietly, waiting for what came next. He appeared at the top of the stairs, scratching his head, eyes half closed, his voice rough as he asked what I was doing up so early. He came down slowly, suspecting nothing, and when he reached the kitchen, he saw the table set. Pancakes stacked like a hotel brunch, a pitcher of freshly squeezed orange juice, sliced strawberries, the white tablecloth he liked when we had guests. He smiled, that smile that always hid something. He said I was amazing, that he didn't understand how I could be so loving even after little fights. He sat in his usual place, pulling the plate closer. And that's when he realized someone else was sitting at the other end of the table, Riley Bennett, the best lawyer he ever underestimated. The shadow of his smile fell instantly, as if knocked over by a gust of wind. He froze, trying to decipher what was going on, and I saw on his face the exact moment he realized everything had changed. And that's how the beginning of the end began. The silence after Dylan's stunned expression was heavier than any scream he'd ever thrown at me. It was a dense, solid, almost tangible silence, the kind that makes the room's temperature drop a few degrees. Riley kept her gaze steady, her posture straight, like she'd spent the whole night waiting for that exact moment. She held a coffee mug in her hands, the same mug with the public library logo where I worked, and that gave me an odd sense of familiarity. Like my real world, the world where I existed without fear, was finally invading the space that had always belonged to him. I sat down slowly, feeling my muscles protest, and noticed that Dylan saw the tension in my body. He tried to hide his own confusion, opened his mouth to say something, maybe some patched-up version of reality like he always liked to invent. But Riley raised a single finger, asking for silence, and he obeyed. For the first time since I met him, he really obeyed. She said she'd come early because I needed support. She didn't specify why. She didn't explain anything. She didn't reveal anything. She just took up space, a space I had never managed to occupy. It was intentional, strategic. The first visible move of my plan, even if, to Dylan, everything still looked like an upside-down game board. Meanwhile, I kept glancing at the kitchen clock. The hands moved slowly, marking every second like time itself had finally taken my side. I knew the window of opportunity I had created, carefully, quietly, was opening at that exact moment, and strangely, I wasn't afraid. I felt something like calm adrenaline, a state of alert that didn't come from panic, but from clarity. I was finally awake. Dylan took a deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation. He started speaking in that soft voice he used when he wanted to manipulate me, saying he didn't understand what was happening, that he'd woken up to the smell of pancakes, that he was happy to see me cooking, that he thought we were fine. He loved that word. Fine. He repeated it so often it felt like code for, "You're not allowed to feel anything outside the story I've built." I let him talk. I needed to hear his version, the one he always crafted when he wanted to blur the truth. He said last night's argument had been silly, that I'd misinterpreted things, that he would never really hurt me. My palm tingled when I heard that. The bruise on my rib throbbed in response. It was like my own body was protesting his lie. I noticed Riley watching every word. She didn't step in. Yet. That morning wasn't about rushing anything. It was about letting Dylan show, with his language and gestures, exactly who he was. And he was. I let him ramble a little longer, then pointed to the chair beside him. I asked him to sit up straight. I told him I wanted to talk about the night before. My voice came out surprisingly steady. He frowned, as if I were breaking some invisible rule of our relationship. The rule that you never directly confront what he did. He leaned back in his chair with a crooked smile, the smile that always came before the gaslighting. But I was ready this time. I calmly began describing what I remembered. The argument, the shove, the impact of my ribs against the edge of the wall, the sound my body made, the way he looked at me for a few seconds, without any expression of regret. I recounted everything with sensory detail, almost clinical. He tried to interrupt twice. Riley raised an eyebrow, and he stopped. When I finished, I felt my heart beating out of rhythm. Too fast, too deep. But still, it was a beat that no longer controlled me. I had control of that narrative now. Me, not him. Dylan smiled slowly, a practiced, fake smile, and said I was exaggerating. Said maybe I had bumped into the wall and not noticed. Said I was sensitive. It was his favorite word, sensitive, as if my reactions were flaws in reality rather than responses to it. I lightly touched the painful spot below my ribs and felt the skin warm under the hoodie. He saw that too, and for a second, just one, his eyes betrayed something. Nervousness, discomfort, guilt. I couldn't read it. But I saw a flicker, and in that tiny instant, I heard a sharp sound from my phone on the counter. A new email notification. I knew exactly what it was. The 3:29 a.m. video, automatically sent to my emergency folder. A copy I had programmed to leave my phone and go straight to the cloud anytime I recorded something sensitive. Dylan didn't notice. Riley did. She gave me a quick look of silent approval. I took a deep breath. The smell of pancakes still hung in the air, sweet and warm, a cruel contrast to the cold conversation we were having. For a moment, I saw my life split into two parts. The part I had lived until then, full of fear, excuses, forced silences, and the part I was about to build, with method, with support, with courage. My hands tingled with that realization. Dylan tried to get up from the table, saying he needed to shower before work. Riley moved before I could react. She set her mug down and said he should stay. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply stated it with the authority of someone used to courtrooms. And to my shock, he stayed. It was almost funny. The man who bragged he could intimidate half the world now hesitated in front of my best friend, drinking coffee at my table. I knew that wasn't the moment to confront him with evidence. That would come later. The plan wasn't a single explosive act, but a series of calculated, coordinated steps that required every piece to be exactly where it needed to be. And I was starting to understand a different kind of strength, one that didn't yell, but also didn't retreat. After a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, Riley said she had to go to work and that she'd be back later. She stood slowly, rested her hand on my shoulder, squeezed gently, and gave me a look full of meaning. I understood. She was telling me I wasn't alone, that the next phase was ready to begin. When she left, the house went quiet again, but not with the same oppressive stillness as before. It was a quiet that felt like it was waiting for something. I got up and started clearing plates, and Dylan watched me. He asked why Riley had been there, asked if I'd told her something, asked if it had to do with last night's argument. I ignored him for a few moments, breathing deeply, mentally recording every move he made. I was preparing myself, silently, methodically, because at that moment, even before the police arrived, even before he understood the size of what had happened, my plan was already in motion. And there was no going back. After Riley left, the house hung in a strange kind of suspension, like every object was paying attention to me. Dylan stayed at the table for a moment, eating slowly, watching every move I made, trying to figure out what was going on. I could feel his attention sticking to my skin, heavy, uncomfortable. But for the first time, it didn't paralyze me. It guided me. It was like each look from him confirmed I was exactly where I needed to be. I kept cleaning the kitchen as if it were just another ordinary morning. Hot water ran over my hands from the faucet, steam rising and making my hair cling to my forehead. That helped keep me from shaking. The smell of pancakes still hung in the air, mixed with something metallic I knew was my own skin. The faint scent of a bruise, almost imperceptible, but impossible for me to ignore. Dylan got up slowly, saying he needed to get ready. He passed behind me and put his hand on my waist like he always did, a gesture that had once been affection, but had turned into a sour reminder of ownership. My body tensed, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. He noticed. He removed his hand slowly, pretending it meant nothing, and went upstairs. When I heard the bathroom door close upstairs, I finally took a deep breath for the first time that morning. I knew I had only a few minutes. I opened the fridge, pulled out the bottom drawer, and took out a clear plastic folder where I'd been storing small things for the past few months. Receipts, hidden photos, copies of messages he deleted from my phone when he thought I was asleep. On the first page, there was a sticky note in Riley's handwriting. "You are not alone. Keep everything." I closed the folder and slipped it into my large bag, the one Dylan never touched because he thought it was too heavy. Then I went to the living room, where the home security camera was hidden behind a vase. He'd put that camera there claiming it was to protect me. The truth was he wanted to watch me. I grabbed the remote and shut the system off completely. Then I did something simple but symbolic. I turned the vase slightly, pointing it a few millimeters outside its usual angle. It wasn't necessary, but it was a silent reminder. He no longer had absolute control over me. I went back to the kitchen and started brewing a second pot of coffee strong, the way only I liked. It was a ritual of calm for me. The sound of the water passing through the filter was delicate, almost hypnotic, and it always helped me think. The clock read 7:18 a.m. I knew that, if everything went according to plan, around 8:30 someone would be knocking at my door, Detective Marisol Vega, and possibly Officer Grant Holloway, if she thought it necessary. Riley had already coordinated this the night before, when I sent the 3:29 a.m. video. I didn't know exactly how they would arrive, or how Dylan would react, but I knew I needed the house to be ready. Not for him, for me. I grabbed a cloth and started wiping the table slowly, not because it was dirty, but because it was the only thing keeping my hands busy. The cold wooden surface reminded me of all the breakfasts where I smiled while broken inside, all the dinners where he made me feel small, all the times he convinced me I needed him to survive. But now, as I dragged the cloth back and forth, it wasn't guilt I felt. It was grief. For what I allowed, for what I lost, for the time that was stolen. And it was also a growing sense of purpose. I heard the bathroom door open upstairs. He was getting ready faster than I expected. I didn't want him to leave, not because I needed him there, but because I needed everything to unfold exactly in the order Riley had planned. If he left, we might lose the chance for an initial on-scene report with the authorities. I needed to maintain normalcy, or something that looked like it. I hurried to the stove and turned the burner back on, reheating the pan. I spread a little butter and poured another round of pancake batter. When he came into the kitchen already dressed, in that light blue shirt he wore to look trustworthy at work, he found more food being prepared. He leaned against the counter, looking at me with a confused, maybe suspicious expression. He asked why I was making more, asked if we were expecting company. The question carried something deeper, a probe for any crack in the control he thought he had. I smiled, a smile that didn't come from fear, but from strategy. I said I'd forgotten it was library committee meeting day and thought more pancakes might help with my busy morning. He laughed, that short laugh he used when he thought he was on top, said I was adorable when I was stressed. I swallowed the bitter taste the word adorable left on my tongue and flipped the pancake calmly. He sat down again, grabbed his phone, opened his emails, like nothing had happened. But I noticed the subtle tremor in his hand. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew something was. And that was enough. I used the moment to adjust the details in the kitchen. I left my bag strategically resting by the island, open just enough to show the edge of the plastic folder, in case I needed to grab it quickly. I also left my phone charging in the outlet near the door, so notifications would be visible without him asking to see it. It wasn't just organization. It was tactical preparation. At 7:42, while I was still at the stove, I got a message from Riley. Just one word, almost. My heart sped up, but my body stayed in the same rhythm. Pancake, butter, flip, brown. Dylan got up to pour himself more juice. I watched him open the fridge and miss everything. When he sat back down, he thanked me casually for breakfast. Everything felt almost domestic, almost peaceful. But there was an electric tension between us. Something underground. Something only the two of us could feel. I sat with my own plate. 2 smaller pancakes. Little syrup, like always. I put the fork in my mouth and realized I was chewing without swallowing. The sweetness didn't taste real. The soft texture felt distant. I was physically present, but my mind was somewhere else, mentally rehearsing each step ahead. Dylan asked if I was okay. I said I was, and as I answered, I heard the sound I'd been waiting for all morning. Firm footsteps on the porch. Then 3 strong knocks on the front door. The 3 knocks were so firm they seemed to vibrate through my ribs. I knew I'd been waiting for this, that I'd wanted this. But the sound still sliced through me, as if it were the first time someone knocked on that house with real authority. Dylan slowly lifted his head, his fork frozen mid-air, his breath caught. The tension flooding the kitchen was impossible to ignore. He looked at me, trying to figure out if the knock had something to do with me, or with him. And right then, I realized he felt real fear for the first time, not because he was aware of what he'd done, but because he didn't control what was happening. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the front door with slow, steady steps. The wood felt heavier than usual, as if it were absorbing the house's entire energy. When I opened it, Detective Marisol Vega stood there next to Officer Grant Holloway. Their presence filled the porch, almost like a human wall blocking any attempted escape, physical or psychological. Marisol wore a black jacket, her badge hanging discreetly around her neck, eyes sharp and calm at the same time. It was the first time I'd seen her in person, but there was something in the way she looked at me, a mix of professionalism and humanity, that made my shoulders drop a few millimeters. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be there. Grant, beside her, held a small folder and a tablet. His gaze was meticulous, detail-oriented, like he was mentally photographing every nuance of my expression. I took a deep breath, opened the door wider, and invited them in. Dylan appeared in the hallway faster than I expected. He was smiling. A hard, tense smile that tried to look cooperative. He asked if there was a problem, hands sliding into his pockets like he always did when he wanted to look harmless. Marisol nodded at him briefly, not smiling. She said they had a few questions about a call logged in the middle of the night. My call. A report I'd made without saying a word, just leaving the line open for a few seconds, like Riley had taught me weeks earlier. If you can't speak, just open the call. The ambient sound will be recorded. Dylan turned to me, surprised, asked why I had called the police, asked if I'd been scared of something. I didn't answer. In that moment, I realized any word I said could be used against me, not legally, but emotionally. He knew how to use silence as a weapon. I was learning too. Marisol asked if we could talk in the kitchen. I led everyone there. The smell of pancakes still dominated the air, creating an ironic sense of comfort in a room that now felt like the stage for something huge. Dylan followed, as if this were just an inconvenience, like he was dealing with plumbers checking for a leak. But each step showed the growing stiffness in his body. He was trying to keep up the facade. Didn't realize it had already cracked long before that morning. Once in the kitchen, Marisol asked me to sit. Grant set the tablet on the table. Dylan stood, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, I could feel his energy drilling into me from the side, searching for small signals to gauge how much I'd said. Marisol took the chair Riley had occupied minutes before. That alone gave me a strange sense of continuity, as if an invisible line connected everyone who had walked in that morning to the movement I started alone at 3:29 a.m. She began by asking if I was okay. A simple question, but it opened a crack inside me. I took a few seconds to answer. Said I was managing. She nodded, as if that word was enough. Then she asked to see my ribs. I hesitated, felt my body recoil. Dylan stepped forward, saying this was an exaggeration, that it wasn't necessary. Grant just lifted his eyes without moving his head, and that was enough for Dylan to step back. I lifted my hoodie slowly, revealing the bruise. It was darker than I expected that early in the morning, almost a deep purple, an irregular shape reaching up toward the side of my bra. Marisol didn't react with shock. She reacted with focus. She studied the edges, the depth of the color, the location. It wasn't the gaze of someone looking at a victim. It was the gaze of someone looking at evidence. Grant recorded notes on the tablet. Dylan opened his mouth, claiming I'd hurt myself, that he'd found me crying and tried to comfort me. The lie poured out of him with nauseating ease, like it was his official version of events. He said I was emotionally unstable, said I'd always been sensitive. The word sensitive fell between us like broken glass. Marisol raised her hand for silence. Her firmness was so natural it surprised even me. She asked, looking straight at him, if he could explain why the police had received a call at 3:17 a.m. and heard sounds of an argument and an impact. Dylan froze. The word impact had pierced the thin layer of control he was clinging to, but he recovered quickly. He was good at that, reclaiming the narrative. He said any noise could be misinterpreted. Maybe I'd slammed a door. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Nausea rose in my throat. His story was so absurd it felt like mockery, and yet I knew I had believed versions like that before. His gaslighting had always been more efficient than the truth. Marisol turned to me, resting her forearms on the table. She spoke slowly, with calculated calm, the kind of calm I'd only seen detectives have in movies when making big decisions. She asked if I wanted to formally report the incident, if I wanted to follow through on what I'd started that night. She gave me options. Clear, objective language, not forcing anything down my throat, and I felt, like I had rarely felt in my life, that her question was giving control back to me. Before I could answer, Grant gave a quick nod in my direction. A signal. He'd received a notification on the tablet. Something about the video sent to the automatic folder. The "For When I'm Ready" folder. He turned the tablet toward me. The video was paused on the first frame. My swollen face, the cold bathroom light, my eyes fixed on the camera. A wave of vulnerability hit me, almost like a shock. I wasn't ready to see that image so soon, but at the same time, I felt something like raw strength. Wounded, but whole. I was there. Alive. Dylan saw the video and his face went pale. He took an instinctive step forward, as if he wanted to rip the tablet out of Grant's hands. But Grant moved quickly, subtly, shifting into a position between us that said everything without a single word. Dylan stepped back. Then again. That's when I noticed his breathing had turned shallow. His jaw trembled slightly. Maybe it was anger, maybe fear. Maybe the first sign that he finally realized reality was no longer molded at his convenience. Marisol calmly asked if we could talk in private. I knew what that meant. It was the first formal step, the first move in his fall. I looked at Dylan. He looked back at me with an expression it took me years to understand. It wasn't love. It had never been. It was possession, loss, wounded ego. And in that moment, With the smell of pancakes in the air and the tablet on the table showing my 3:29 a.m. video, I finally answered Marisol's question. Yes. I want to go forward with this, and this time, my voice didn't shake. When the word yes left my mouth, it felt like the ground had shifted a centimeter to the left, almost imperceptible, but enough to throw off the house's balance. It was as if everything inside me had aligned against the gravity Dylan had exerted for years. I was doing something irreversible, and my body sensed it before my mind could process it. Marisol nodded slowly, without even looking at Dylan. She opened the folder she was carrying and took out a standard preliminary report form. She said she needed some basic details, that we'd do the full statement afterward. I sat at the table again, and the warm smell of pancakes, now almost cold, felt like it was mocking us. The kitchen was caught between two worlds, the domestic routine and the start of a process that would change everything. Dylan stepped forward, agitated. He said this was absurd, that I was going through some emotional crisis, that maybe I was under someone's influence. He looked straight at me, and in that look, there was a request disguised as a threat, a plea for my silence. My shoulders shrank instinctively, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. I couldn't step back. Grant moved slightly, blocking the path between Dylan and the table without raising his voice, just positioning his body. A simple gesture, but it snapped Dylan's power in an instant. Marisol told him to step back and wait in the living room. Dylan laughed, a short, incredulous, arrogant laugh. He said he had nothing to hide, that he could stay right there and listen, which was ironic, coming from someone who loved half conversations, whispered manipulations, doors closed. Marisol looked straight at him and said, in the calmest tone possible, that this wasn't a request, it was an instruction. He hesitated for 2 seconds, too long for the spotless reputation he liked to project. But then he backed up, walking into the living room with heavy, rigid steps, like each one was an admission of defeat. As he left, Grant began photographing the bruise. Flash, side angle, front angle, scale with a flexible ruler. He also photographed the kitchen, the table, the object placement. Everything felt like staging, but I knew this was the first official record. The first visual capture confirming something was deeply wrong inside that house. Then Marisol asked me to describe the previous night from the beginning. I started slowly, feeling each word scrape my throat like it was made of glass. I told her about the argument, the words he used, the moment he shoved me. I described the impact against the wall, the dry sound my body made, the pain radiating like lightning. I gave the exact time I took the photos. And as I spoke, I felt my chest easing. Just the act of narrating made me lighter. It was as if all those memories I had kept compressed for years finally had space to exist outside of me. Marisol asked specific questions, without sensationalism. She wanted facts, times, details, and I had them. Because that night, I'd been meticulous. Everything was documented. The photos at 3:29, the video, the silent call to the police, the emails sent to the folder. My memory was no longer at the mercy of Dylan's distortions. It had backup. Dylan kept drifting toward the doorway, restless, leaning in to listen. Marisol looked up once. She said, without lifting her pen, that if he kept interfering, he would be escorted outside. He backed off, but his agitation filled the air, like unresolved static. After nearly 40 minutes, Marisol closed the folder, took a breath, and stood. Said she needed to speak with Dylan now. A cold wave ran up my spine. The first fall. The first blow to the invisible empire he believed he controlled. I stayed in the kitchen while they talked in the living room. I couldn't hear full sentences, only tones. His voice trying to sound steady, hers firm, completely unwavering. Grant's occasionally cutting in with something more technical. I gripped the edge of the sink, listening to fragments of phrases floating through. Enough records to proceed with preventive detention. Dylan's steps grew loud and impatient. His voice climbed, saying this was ridiculous, that she had no proof. Then came the second sentence that changed the room's energy. Your behavior confirms ongoing risk. That's why the procedure is immediate. I heard the sharp clink of handcuffs, a short, metallic sound that sliced the air like a silent gunshot. I'd never heard that sound up close before. But right then, it sounded like justice. Not vengeance. Not revenge. Justice. Dylan started yelling my name, not as a plea, as an order. A shout full of childish fury, the tantrum of someone who'd never been challenged. He screamed that I was making a mistake, that I'd regret it. Commanded me to come to the living room. I didn't go. For the first time since I'd met him, I ignored his voice completely. Marisol appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face neutral, professional. She said Dylan was being taken to the station for formal procedures, asked if I had someone to stay with me. I didn't answer right away. My breathing was shallow, my whole body buzzing with a cocktail of relief and concentrated trauma. She looked me in the eyes and said, with a calm that felt almost protective, "You're not alone, Ava." Grant crossed the room leading Dylan in cuffs. Dylan walked past me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing control of the story, but fear of real consequences. He twisted, trying to shake off the cuffs, shouting my name again. But now it was different. He was calling me like someone calls the ground while falling. Desperate. Pathetic. The door closed behind them. The sound echoed through the house. The silence that followed wasn't the heavy silence of submission. It was the silence of a house breathing for the first time. I stood there, staring at the cold pancakes, the half-full mugs, the clear folder inside my bag, and realized that although this was just the first step, something profound had changed. Dylan Mercer was no longer untouchable, and I was starting, slowly, to exist again. The door had barely closed behind Dylan when my legs suddenly felt oddly light, like they no longer belonged to my body. The house's silence was almost deafening, a silence I'd never experienced before. It wasn't the silence before an attack, or the suffocating silence I'd learned to interpret as a warning. It was a clean silence, cold, clear. A silence that shows up when the physical threat has left the room, but the emotional tension is still trapped under your skin. Marisol asked me to sit on the couch, said she needed to go over a few procedures now that Dylan was in initial custody. I sat slowly, feeling the room like a house I'd never been in, even though I'd lived there for years. The sunlight coming through the windows lit up dust floating in the air, and it reminded me in a strange way how life sometimes pauses, waiting for someone to make the right decision so it can move again. Grant came back a few minutes later, without Dylan, carrying some forms and calmly explaining what came next. He talked about the TRO, temporary restraining order. A temporary protection order Riley had already prepared behind the scenes, ready to file as soon as I agreed to move forward. I watched the pen in his hand, the precise way he filled each field, like every line was taking a bit of the weight I'd been carrying for years. Marisol, sitting beside me, explained that last night's assault, combined with the video, photos, and silent call, was enough to keep Dylan detained until the initial hearing, but that we needed to act fast. She asked if I had other records, and my breath hitched for a second. Because I did. A lot. I got up and went to the kitchen, where my bag still leaned against the island. I took out the clear folder and placed it on the living room table almost reverently. The folder looked small, but it held years of reality fragments, pieces of myself I'd hidden in order to survive. Marisol opened it slowly, and the first thing she saw were printed photos of old bruises, dated in blue ink. My face flushed. Shame. Not for what I'd suffered, but for having accepted it for so long. Then came the emails. Messages I'd sent myself with subject lines like, "Remember, it's not your fault. Save this." Each one containing screenshots of threats, short audio clips of arguments, captures of bank transfers Dylan had made to Jace Rourke, a name I'd been trying not to fully face. I knew Dylan had a useful friend who popped up sometimes in the messages he rushed to delete. But seeing all the evidence gathered there, repeated transfers, some labeled favor, others urgent, hit me deeply. Grant wrote everything down, asking for details, checking dates. He asked if I knew who Jace was. The name slammed against the walls of my mind. I remembered a shadow on the street weeks earlier. Remembered hearing footsteps behind me after leaving the library. Remembered the brick thrown at my window 2 months earlier, accompanied by a clumsy spray-painted message that Dylan insisted was random vandalism. My breath caught. He knew. Somehow he knew I was trying to break the cycle, even before I fully knew it myself. When I mentioned the brick, Marisol exchanged a quick, tactical glance with Grant. It wasn't news to them. They'd seen many stories like mine, but each one with its own specifics. The brick shifted the legal framework. The transfers, too. The text threats from unknown numbers, which I'd always deleted, thinking I was overreacting, now had weight. I pulled up my phone and showed them screenshots. Short, rushed messages. Go back home. You don't belong there. He's not going to let you go. No signature. But patterns. Typos identical to Dylan's. The same mix of short sentences and sudden bursts of rage. Grant logged everything. Then I mentioned the video, Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb's video, my neighbor's. A short clip that had haunted me for weeks. She'd sent it without really knowing what she'd caught, just saying her camera had recorded something strange on the sidewalk. Marisol asked to see it. I opened it on my phone, my heart racing even before I hit play. The footage showed Dylan shoving me against the outer wall 2 months earlier. It was nighttime. The lighting was poor, but enough to capture his rough gesture, the blunt impact, my body stumbling sideways. I'd never managed to watch it all the way through before. Marisol watched it twice. Grant logged the date, time, and camera location. I stood still, staring at my own image on the screen like it was someone else. I was a different person then. Marisol said the clip changed the legal angle, that it showed a pattern, recurrence, escalation, and that prosecutors don't like patterns like that, especially not with such clear evidence. She spoke with the certainty of someone who knew exactly where every piece fit. I, on the other hand, felt like those same pieces were being pulled out of me, forming a picture I'd avoided seeing whole for years. When we finished reviewing everything, Grant printed the forms for the protection order. He asked me to sign in the bottom right corner. I took the pen. My hand trembled, not from weakness, but from the tension of a body finally finding a way out. I signed slowly, each letter feeling like a blow to a locked door inside me. When I finished, Grant collected the form, said it gave me immediate protection, that Dylan couldn't come near me, my house, or my work, that violating that order would mean automatic jail time. Automatic. The word was heavy, but strangely freeing. Marisol said the next step would be to formalize everything with a specialist attorney in complex abuse cases, especially where there was a history of financial manipulation. I knew who she meant, Camille Jung, one of the hardest, sharpest lawyers in the area. The kind of woman who didn't waste time and didn't lose cases. Riley had mentioned her before, saying that if I ever needed someone cold enough to face Dylan in court, Camille was the only one who'd do. As soon as Marisol said her name, my throat tightened. It was real, big, dangerous, but it was mine. The detective asked if I needed someone with me. I almost said I'd be fine, but my voice faltered. So I did something simple, almost instinctive. I grabbed my phone and called Riley. She answered on the first ring. When I heard her say Ava, My entire body caved inwards, like someone had removed a structural beam I'd been forcing into place for years. I told her I needed her. She said she was on her way. Marisol gave me final instructions. Don't contact Dylan. Don't respond to messages. Don't open the door for anyone not clearly identified. Keep my phone charged. Rest if possible, even though rest felt impossible. When they left, the house filled again with that strange silence. But this time, it didn't hurt. It was the silence between acts. The space where breathing resets, where the body regains its center, where the truth finally finds room to exist. I was at the beginning of the legal phase, and, for the first time, I wasn't walking through it alone. Riley arrived shortly before noon, and the first thing she did when she came through the door was hug me, tight, long, the kind of hug that anchors your body to the present. I didn't know how badly I needed it until I felt it. My chest collapsed silently but deeply. It was like my nervous system finally lowered its guard for the first time since the night. She hugged me one last time, then looked around the living room, taking everything in with that quick, strategic gaze she'd always had. A friend's eyes, yes, but also a lawyer's. Someone used to hearing stories like mine and guiding women through the chaos that comes afterward. She opened the folder Grant had left, read through the restraining order, and nodded in approval. Said I'd done everything right. Took photos, kept records, saved everything, and, most of all, said yes to Marisol's question. But as she spoke, I noticed she was holding something back. There was a careful note in her voice, a hesitation that didn't fit her. I asked what it was. She answered with the honesty that had always scared and strengthened me at the same time. What happens in the next few weeks might be harder than what's happened so far. I didn't understand at first. Dylan was in custody. I had a protection order. The police had evidence. But Riley calmly explained that the initial fall of the abuser often triggers a kind of panic that spreads through whatever they still control. Friends, contacts, people who benefit from them or believe their version. And sometimes, men like Dylan have someone willing to get their hands dirty for them. Jace Rourke. The name cut into my mind like a knife. Riley didn't know the details yet, but she'd already seen the transfers. She said that name would come up again. She also said that when men like Dylan feel the ground give way, they try to rebuild control by force, even if indirectly. And that's exactly what started happening. Early that afternoon, I got the first text from an unknown number. A short line. He's not going to be in there for long. The tone of the threat wasn't Dylan's, but the style, the lack of punctuation, the rushed letters, felt familiar. I showed Riley. She took screenshots, sent them to Marisol, and told me to block the number. My hands shook as I did. Minutes later, another number texted, "You think you won, but you didn't win anything." I blocked that too. With every number I blocked, new ones appeared. Riley said it was important to document everything, but also filter, because the emotional avalanche from that kind of harassment could break anyone, even someone strong. I sat on the couch while she called Camille on video. The lawyer's face appeared on the screen. Sharp features, hair pulled back, focused expression. She didn't waste words. She said she'd officially take the case. She'd already requested the initial court documents. She told me to follow a basic protocol. Doors locked, curtains closed at night, phone within reach, avoid going out alone until things stabilized. Then she brought up something I'd never considered. When the abuser loses physical access, he tries to occupy the psychological space. That line hit me like silent lightning. Camille ended the call saying she'd send a checklist with formal instructions. Riley told me to drink some water. Only then did I realize my body was fully tense, as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. But the real escalation didn't start with the messages. It started with a shadow. That same afternoon, around 5 dar, I went to pick up a package on the porch. The sun was low, casting a golden light that made everything feel slower. When I bent down to grab the box, I felt, not saw, that someone was at the end of the street. When I raised my eyes, there was a silhouette standing still between two trees, arms crossed, body rigid, face hidden by the shadow of the leaves. The figure stayed there for several seconds, too long to be a coincidence, too long to be someone just passing by. I froze. My whole body went on high alert. But before I could react, the person turned and got into a black car parked crookedly at the curb. The car pulled away slowly, like it wasn't in a hurry, like it was just letting me know it could come back any time. I rushed back inside, slammed the door, and leaned my back against it. My heart was pounding in my throat like it had a will of its own. When I told Riley, she went pale. Grabbed my phone, called Marisol, reported everything. Marisol asked for details about the car and promised to send a patrol through the street over the next hours. Said it was a clear sign of intimidation. And when she said intimidation, my whole body reacted. Because that word had always been Dylan's territory. But now there were witnesses. Still, even with all the support, not everything just evaporated. That night, when the sun had fully set and the house lights glowed through the windows, I realized how terrifying it is to inhabit a space that for years was a minefield. Riley slept in the guest room. She said she wouldn't leave me alone until we had more clarity about the next few days. I tried to sleep, but my body refused. The mattress felt different. The walls looked closer. The house was too quiet, and even though the silence was better than the silence of fear, it was still a silence that pulsed. A little after 2 a.m, I woke up to a dull thud on the exterior siding, like something had hit the wooden facade. I jumped out of bed. Riley was in the hallway seconds later, her hand on my doorknob, asking if I'd heard it. Another noise came, softer. She told me to stay behind her and went to the side window downstairs. She avoided turning the lights on. Pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek. 2 letters were marked on the sidewalk with something wet. DM. They didn't have to say more. Riley took 3 photos, immediately called Marisol, and said this wasn't a coincidence. My body shook, not from fear, but from anger. It was a blatant attempt to keep Dylan's shadow alive, even from jail. Marisol arrived 40 minutes later. She inspected the marks, said it was done by someone trying to scare me, not hurt me. Pure psychology, signaling, territory, control. Exactly the sort of thing Jace would do with pleasure. She gave us some guidelines. Don't open windows, reinforce locks, turn on automatic lights, avoid predictable routines. Asked me not to go out alone for a few days. I just nodded, absorbing each word like a medical procedure, direct and necessary. But the truth is that while she took pictures and Riley held me by the shoulders, something hit me harder than any of it. Dylan's fall had begun. And because of that, everything around him would try to drag me down too. But I wasn't going to fall with him. Not this time. The next morning, the light filtered through the blinds with a soft bluish tone. It was like the house was rolling its own shoulders after years hunched in on itself. But I woke up before sunrise, with that hyper-alert state coiled in my body like a small, fast animal, hard to tame. The street was quiet, but not empty. It was a quiet that watched. Riley was still asleep in the guest room when the doorbell rang. A short, hesitant, almost polite ring. Different from Marisol's firm knock the day before. I took a few seconds to open, not from fear, but because, for the first time, I was choosing caution instead of submission. Through the side glass panel, I saw Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb, my next-door neighbor. She was holding a floral cloth bag like something out of an old movie. Her white hair was pulled into a messy bun, her expression worried but resolute. I opened the door slowly. Before I could say anything, she put a hand on my arm and said, I heard, and I came. She didn't ask if I wanted her there. Didn't ask permission. She just stepped inside with the quiet determination of a woman who's seen more than she should in this life. She set the bag on the table and pulled out a big container of homemade soup wrapped in a thermal towel. Said she knew I probably hadn't been eating well, that in times like this the body needs to be treated like a sick child, with hot food and presents. A lump rose in my throat. I couldn't remember the last time someone cooked for me without wanting something in return. When Riley woke up and joined us, Eleanor was already explaining something important. She had more recordings, not just the one where Dylan shoved me against the wall. Other small clips, fragments from the last month showing him pacing around the house, arguing with me on the porch, gesturing aggressively from the other side of the fence. She'd never wanted to butt in, but had saved everything just in case. Now she thought I should have them. I watched the videos on her phone, my body reacting differently to each one, sometimes with a knot in my stomach, sometimes with deep repulsion, sometimes with a shame I couldn't name. Riley studied everything with a legal eye, already talking about admissibility, chain of custody, timestamps. Eleanor, meanwhile, was simply there with me, like someone holding my hand in the dark. Before leaving, she cupped my face gently and said, "You weren't crazy. You were too alone." That sentence echoed in the back of my mind the rest of the day. Not long after, my cousin Tessa arrived, without warning. She'd always been like that, explosive, affectionate, a bit chaotic, but with a heart that beats outside her chest. She threw her backpack onto the floor and hugged me so hard my ribs protested. She cried from guilt for not seeing it, cried from relief that I was alive, cried from rage at Dylan. When she stopped, she said she'd stay with me as long as I needed. Tessa was Riley's opposite, emotional, intuitive, messy, but together, their presence in my house created a kind of protection I'd never felt. An invisible field, a place to fall without breaking again. In the afternoon, Riley insisted I go to a support group for women who had survived domestic abuse, run by Maya Ellington. I hesitated. The idea of stepping into a room full of strangers sharing pain that mirrored mine turned my stomach. But Riley put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Ava, you don't have to talk. You just have to be there." I agreed. The room where the group met was simple, with warm lights and a subtle lavender scent. When I walked in, I felt a strange warmth on my skin, like the room itself had the power to loosen the muscles in my back I didn't realize were so tight. Maya was a woman with a low, steady voice and a smile that didn't try too hard. She welcomed me without questions, without demanding a story, just said I could sit wherever I wanted. The women in the circle were different ages, faces, backgrounds, but shared one look. Not a look of pain, but of recognition, like they spoke a silent language only those who've lived it understand. I didn't speak at that first meeting. I just listened. I heard stories that sounded like distorted echoes of my own, but I also heard something that surprised me. Laughter. Not manic laughter, but small sparks of humor, irony, defiance. Women turning survival into a kind of stubborn, vital force. I left with the deep sense that the loneliness I'd carried in my bones was starting to dissolve. On the way home, Tessa told me something that caught me off guard. A woman named Harper Sloan had contacted Riley. Harper, a name I'd heard Dylan shout once during an argument, calling her crazy, obsessed, unstable. I remember believing him. I remember how violent he became when I asked anything about her. Riley explained that Harper had been Dylan's girlfriend before me, and that her history looked a lot like mine. She'd tried to report him, but back then he'd been more cautious, more contained, more polished. She had no proof. But now, after hearing I'd gone to the police, she'd reached out to Riley to share things she'd been holding for years, including that Dylan used other men to intimidate women who tried to leave him, including that Jace had already been in her story. The air left my lungs in a strange rush. I'd never met Harper, never even seen her face. But I felt an immediate bond, almost visceral, like she was a missing piece of the puzzle I'd been trying to solve for years. Riley said Harper would send us old screenshots, audio recordings of late-night calls, bits of footage from a camera he'd found and destroyed, but that she'd partially recovered from a backup. Evidence that, added to mine, could build a much stronger case. That night, I came home emotionally drained, but with a sense of solidarity I'd never known. Riley pushed me to talk to a trauma specialist, and I agreed. Marisol recommended a therapist, Dr. Adrian Lagari, known for working with domestic abuse survivors for over 20 years. He agreed to see me the next day. After I confirmed the appointment, I sat at the edge of my bed and took a deep breath. For the first time since everything started, I felt like I was part of something bigger than my pain, a network, a structure, a world I hadn't known existed, ready to hold me while I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I wasn't invisible anymore, and maybe for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to live. The next morning I woke before the alarm, not because I'd slept well, but because my body had learned to stand guard even while resting. Soft light came through the window, drawing a yellow rectangle on the carpet. Riley had already left for a meeting, leaving a mug of tea on my nightstand with a short note. Today is about method, not fear. I sat up and stayed there for a few seconds, listening to the house breathe. Even with the protection order, even with Dylan in custody, my nervous system didn't fully believe I was safe. I knew, deeply, that trauma doesn't switch off like a light. It hides in walls, in floors, in the space between movements. That morning, every small noise felt exaggerated inside my chest. At 9, Camille called for a video conference. The screen split between her, impeccable, focused, with dozens of documents open, and Riley, serious as ever. Camille began with the cold precision that made her the most feared lawyer in court. A clear timeline. She wanted everything: dates, times, mood shifts, repeated behaviors, escalation patterns, times I tried to leave and got pulled back, times Dylan used money to control the narrative. She organized everything into columns: physical abuse, psychological abuse, intimidation, financial manipulation, direct threats, intermediaries. When we got to the intermediaries column, the name sliced across the screen: Jace Rourke. Camille pressed her lips together, studying the $1,200 transfer we'd found. She asked when I thought he started circling around me. I described the shadow on the street, the feeling of being followed, the brick and graffiti, the tightening sense that my world was shrinking. She noted everything without drama or sentimental commentary, just facts, evidence, admissibility. Once, she lifted her eyes from the screen and said, "Men like Dylan do not operate alone, and when they bring someone like that in, it's always to intimidate, never to protect." Her clarity cut the air like a surgeon's blade. In the middle of the meeting, we got a notification. Harper had sent over a file with nearly 40 pages of screenshots, audio clips, and old emails. The document was a maze of evidence. Texts where Dylan told her to control your episode. Audio where he insisted, "No one will believe you. You don't know who you're dealing with." Call logs in the middle of the night. The same pattern I lived through. The most disturbing thing was seeing that some of the sentences were identical to the ones I'd heard. Not similar. Identical. It was like he had a manual for destroying women from the inside out, repeating the same script over and over. Camille immediately filed the document into a folder marked Harper, Corroboration Set A. Then opened another, Pattern of Abuse, Cross Victims. Her precision scared and comforted me at the same time. When the meeting ended, my body felt exhausted, like I'd been carrying an invisible suitcase for hours. Riley hugged me before heading out and said I had my first session with Dr. Lagari that afternoon, and I shouldn't skip it, even if my instinct was to curl inward. His office was downtown, in an old building with huge windows. The room had blue walls and warm lighting that eased your shoulders before anyone even spoke. When he walked in, he was younger than I'd imagined, and much calmer. He offered his hand without insisting I shake it. "I know you don't need a savior," he said. "Just someone to hold the flashlight while you walk through the tunnel." That broke something open inside me. I sat in the armchair and told him about 3:29 a.m., the bruise, Dylan being taken away, the anonymous messages, the shadow at the end of the street. He listened without interrupting. Then he explained something that marked me deeply. The body doesn't distinguish between real danger and expected danger. To it, everything was still threat. He said my nervous system was hypervigilant, stuck in survival mode, and that regulating it would take time. He taught me a simple exercise, almost childish, but effective. Touch 3 objects in the room and mentally describe their textures, weights, colors. Then breathe as if filling only one side of my ribcage. I felt ridiculous for a second, until I noticed I was actually breathing for the first time since everything began. When I left his office, the air felt different. But the day wasn't over. That night, Harper came in person. I trembled when I saw her at the door, not because she looked dangerous, but because she was a living mirror of who I might have become. Her face carried old marks of things never cared for at the right time. She hugged me slowly, carefully, like someone who recognizes a wound she's already worn. "He's not going to do to you what he did to me," she whispered. "Not this time." She brought something important, a flash drive with files she hadn't sent by email, recovered images from an old hard drive showing Dylan arguing with her in a garage, an audio clip of him saying he'd have someone handle her if she kept exposing him, and, what made Camille cover her mouth, a transfer just like mine, sent to Jace years ago. The connection was complete. The pattern drawn. As Harper talked, as Riley analyzed each point, as Camille typed furiously, I felt something growing inside me. Slow but solid. Not hatred. Not revenge. Direction. I was getting closer to the final confrontation, not just with Dylan, but with the system he used to exist in. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was entering a level of awareness I'd never had. I was ready to face the court. And for the first time, he wouldn't own the narrative. On the day of the hearing, I woke before dawn. Not because I wanted to, but because my body seemed to know everything would change that day. The house was quiet, and for the first time, that quiet didn't feel like a warning. It felt like the moment before an orchestra starts playing. Suspended air, a sign that something bigger was about to happen. Tessa helped me get ready. Nothing fancy. A simple white shirt, clean, a discreet coat, dark pants. She said I looked sober, in the aesthetic sense, and that in that courtroom, sobriety would speak louder than any sparkle. Riley came by to review documents, and Camille arrived with a thick folder marked with colored tabs like we were about to defend a thesis instead of dismantling a man who'd destroyed parts of my life. Walking into the courthouse felt like stepping through a tunnel of compressed oxygen. My heart was racing, but in rhythm, as if it had finally found coherence. The lights were too white, the walls too cold, and footsteps echoed too loud against marble. I saw Harper sitting in the back, with a staff member from the support center. She gave me a small nod, barely visible, but enough. When Dylan was brought in under guard, my whole body reacted. Not exactly with fear. It was more like seeing a ghost in the flesh. He looked paler, as if the days in custody had drained the arrogant confidence he wore like a second skin. He scanned the room for invisible allies, and when his eyes met mine, there was a silent jolt. He expected to find the woman he knew, the woman he'd trained to shrink, apologize, doubt her own memory. But he found someone else. Someone with evidence. The judge entered, and the room fell into absolute silence. Our case was called, and Camille began with surgical precision. She presented the timeline first, cold, organized, impossible to twist. Every event labeled with date, time, place, and matching document. It was like watching an emotional autopsy of my last few years. Then came the visual evidence. The screen lit up. The first image was one of the photos I'd taken at 3:29 a.m. No matter how many times I'd seen it, it hit me like the first time. My swollen face. The purple bruise curved ugly and clear. The room went silent. Even Dylan looked away for a second. Too quick for most people to catch. But I did. Then came Eleanor's video. The same one I'd spent weeks avoiding. It showed Dylan shoving me on the sidewalk months earlier. Quick, aggressive, unmistakable. Eleanor took the stand to confirm authenticity. She walked with small but firm steps. Her voice was soft but absolutely clear as she confirmed the date, time, and that she'd kept the video because something didn't feel right in that house. The judge thanked her, and she sat down with the quiet dignity of someone who knows she's just changed the course of a story. Then came the screenshots, the anonymous messages, the threats, the transfers to Jace. Grant's testimony was crucial. He explained the chain of custody, metadata verification, the origins of the phone numbers. Each piece chipped away at Dylan's story. Tension in the room spiked when Camille played an old audio Harper had saved. Dylan's voice, flat and chilling. "No one's ever going to believe you. You don't know who you're dealing with." The judge watched carefully. Dylan twitched in his seat. Harper kept her eyes on the floor. Marisol presented the consolidated police report. The 317 call, the sounds recorded on the line, initial statements, photos taken by Grant, preliminary forensic analysis. Each document felt like a hammer blow into a rotten structure. Dylan started unraveling, tugging at his collar, breathing fast, muttering to his lawyer that everything was being twisted. I watched, steady. It wasn't hatred. It was clarity. But the moment that split the courtroom in two was when Camille called Jace Rourke to testify. I didn't know if he'd come, didn't know if he'd talk, but he walked in wearing handcuffs, guarded by 2 officers, looking smaller than I'd imagined. Face marked, shoulders slumped. He sat without looking directly at me. Camille was blunt. She asked about the transfers, the brick, the shadow on my street, who had hired him. He hesitated for long seconds. His eyes scanned the room, then dropped to the documents Camille had laid out like blades. Finally, he said the line that shattered Dylan's defense. "It was Dylan. He paid me to scare her." The room reacted with a silence so deep it sounded like noise. Dylan's lawyer jumped up, protesting that this was inadmissible, that Jace was just trying to reduce his own sentence. But Camille had one more card, a recent transfer, dated and documented, labeled urgent favor, from Dylan's account straight to Jace. Dylan lost control. He stood, trying to talk over the judge, claiming it was all a setup, that I was manipulative, that I'd invented everything. The judge ordered him to sit. He didn't. Twice. He was warned for contempt. Still, he ranted, a caged animal realizing the bars were real. It was there, in the middle of his collapse, that I saw something I'd never seen before. Dylan wasn't powerful. He was just used to never being confronted. Camille asked for a final word. She spoke firmly, without aggression. She explained the pattern, the risk. Made it clear that women leaving relationships like mine had a heightened risk of violence in the weeks afterwards. She explained that this wasn't just about one assault. It was about years of strategic manipulation, indirect threats, financial control, and psychological terror. When she finished, the air in the room felt different. The judge took a deep breath, adjusted his glasses, and delivered the decision. I don't remember every word, not because he spoke fast, but because their weight hit me like anesthetic. What I do remember, clearly, is the conclusion. Dylan Mercer would remain in custody. He would answer for aggravated assault, coercion, stalking, and using third parties for intimidation. The protection order would be extended. The criminal case would move forward to formal trial. When the hearing ended, I stayed seated for a few seconds, as if my body hadn't yet understood it could move. Harper put a hand on my shoulder. Riley smiled for the first time in days. Camille closed her files like someone finishing a chapter in a book that would still have sequels. I looked at the counsel table, at the now blank screen, at the wooden benches. At the door Dylan had been led through, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Air, clean, breathable. I had survived the court, and from that moment on, I was starting something new. When I left the courthouse that day, the late afternoon light looked different. A richer gold, almost too warm for that season. Riley joked it was absolution light, but I knew it wasn't that. It was the same light as always. I just wasn't seeing it from inside his shadow anymore. Life didn't go back to normal. Nothing ever really goes back. Life reshapes itself. And that's exactly what began happening in the weeks that followed. Going home that night felt strange. I walked in through the front door like always, but the air seemed rearranged. I smelled the wood, the neutral detergent Tessa had used to clean everything while I was out, the texture of the floor under my bare feet. Every simple sensation tasted like presence. I was there, in my own space, without having to read anyone's emotional temperature before I could breathe. Tessa insisted on staying at the house with me for a few days, and I let her. Not because I thought something bad would happen, but because my body still took time to believe it was safe. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake with my heart racing, no idea why. I'd turn on the light, scan the room, see the locked door, hear the silence, and it took my body a few minutes to settle. Trauma is persistent. It lives in the body like an autonomous memory. In my sessions with Dr. Ligari, I started understanding that better. He taught me to notice my breathing, my shoulders, the invisible tension I carried even when I laughed. In one session, he asked me to describe how my body had learned to survive over the last few years. As I spoke, my hands balled into fists without me noticing. He pointed it out and said, "Your body armors itself before your mind even knows why, but that armor isn't yours anymore. We're going to give it back to who it belongs to. You." I cried that day. Not out of sadness, but because I felt something loosen inside, like I was returning a weight I'd been carrying without strength. As the weeks passed, my routine slowly came back. I returned to work at the library, first on reduced hours, then with more confidence. Seeing my books again was almost therapeutic. Touching spines, rearranging shelves, checking in returns. Each gesture made me feel like I was rebuilding my brain with my hands. That's where I crossed paths again with Ethan Reyes. He was one of the senior librarians, always cheerful, always willing to help anyone who walked in with the vaguest description of a book. I'd never paid much attention to him beyond the professional, but now I noticed how he always respected space, how he spoke without intruding, how he looked just enough, and never too much. My first week back, he left a mug of lavender tea on my desk with a short note. "In case you want something warm, E." He didn't ask anything, didn't push, just offered something gentle. I kept finding small kindnesses from him in the days that followed. A chair adjusted, a book left with a note saying, "Thought you might like this one." Little things, nothing that demanded a response, nothing that created emotional debt. It was light, subtle, and precisely because of that, profound. Other people were quietly taking root in my life too. At Maya's support group, I started talking. The first time, it was nearly a whisper, a short sentence, no details. But everyone listened as if I'd given a speech. They didn't interrupt, didn't pry, just held that silence that doesn't judge, doesn't rush, doesn't invade. A silence that belongs to women who've learned to survive together. Maya also asked me to pick up old hobbies, to see if my body remembered how to exist outside of constant vigilance. I laughed and told her I didn't have hobbies. She asked if I didn't like painting. I frowned. She said she'd seen old paint stains on my nails once. I looked at my own hands and realized that for years I'd avoided even remembering I liked art because Dylan thought it was childish. Going back to painting was like a rebirth. At first, my lines were rigid, cramped, like my body was still asking permission to exist. Slowly, the strokes loosened. Lines, then shapes, then color. Strong, unexpected colors, like something was bursting out after too long locked away. Riley said I was washing my soul in watercolor. Tessa said I was breathing paint. Harper said my style was chaotic and beautiful, like women who survive tend to be. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was mine. Over time, I also started changing corners of the house. Furniture, Dylan hated. I painted white. Pillows he called tacky. I put back. Old photos of me in my 20s that I'd hidden years ago went back on the shelves. The house began to smell different. Fresh coffee, pancakes made just for me, paint drying on improvised canvases. The biggest change, though, wasn't physical. It was the way I occupied space. I walked barefoot without worrying about footsteps behind me. I ate when I was hungry. I slept with the door open because I wanted to, not because someone demanded it. I left the living room window open when the breeze was good. I locked the door, not out of fear, but care. And the world responded. Women from the group texted me encouragement. Dr. Ligari said my nervous system was relearning how to tolerate peace. Maya invited me to volunteer with the group, saying that even my fragile voice already inspired others. Harper started rebuilding her life too, and sometimes we met for coffee. Tessa became a constant presence. Riley, even back in full throttle work mode, showed up whenever I needed her. Day by day, week by week, breath by breath, I realized something very simple and huge. I was rebuilding my life, piece by piece, quietly, in color, in freedom. And it wasn't about Dylan, or the court, or legal victory. It was about me, about existing without fear, about learning my body was a home, not a battleground. And for the first time since everything started, life felt like it was expanding again, slow, steady, irreversible. I was being reborn. 5 years have passed. Sometimes I'm shocked at how fast time goes. Other times it feels like it finally moves at the right pace. Not dragged out, not rushed, just human. There are days I wake up and almost forget what it was like to live in fear. Not because the past disappeared, but because it lost its grip on my present. My life now isn't made of vigilance. It's made of choice. I woke up today to soft light coming through the curtains of my studio. Yes, I have a studio now. A small room that used to be storage and slowly became a sanctuary of color. The main wall is covered in my paintings, some abstract, some figurative. Each one holds a layer of my story, like I pulled bits of pain out of myself and turned them into solid color. For years, I thought painting was a waste of time. Dylan said so. Now, painting is like taking a deep breath after years of holding it. The house has changed too. I repainted the walls, knocked down a partition, filled the place with plants. I wanted light, openness, warmth, everything it never was. As I changed the house, it changed something in me. It's strange how walls can hold memories, and how they can release them when you give them new coats of paint. On one living room wall hangs a framed copy of the first print of my book, Pancakes and Power. The first time I held it, I cried. Not for the publication itself, but because I felt I'd turned a chapter of my life that almost destroyed me into something that could help other women. The title, Riley's suggestion, captures what I learned. Even on the worst nights, You can start building tomorrow with something small, even if it's just making pancakes while the world falls apart. The book took on a life of its own. It became the topic of talks, workshops, community projects. On a mural in a women's shelter in Chicago, there's a quote of mine painted next to an image that looks like a reimagined version of me. When the pain dries, what's left is method. I never imagined the words I wrote shaking in the middle of the night would travel that far. These days, my routine is a blend of art, library work, and social projects. I work part-time at the library, not because I have to, but because I love it. The smell of books, the easy conversations with patrons, the feeling that stories save lives. The rest of my time goes to the support groups I co-facilitate with Maya. Sometimes, when a new woman walks into the room with that look I know so well, the look of someone trying to hold her body together so it doesn't collapse, I see myself in her, and I remember that survival doesn't have to be lonely. Ethan is part of my life now too, not in the cinematic, explosive way movies like to script it. He came in slowly, step by step, always wordlessly asking for permission to take up space. Our first kiss only happened months after we'd built a solid friendship, full of respect and small exchanges. There was never any urgency. He approached me like someone learning a new language without rushing, admiring each small milestone. The first night I slept without waking an alarm. The first time I opened the front door without checking the peephole 3 times. The first time I painted without fearing mistakes. With him, I discovered something I thought was impossible. Love without tension, without control, without surveillance. A love that doesn't demand, doesn't squeeze, doesn't shape. It just accompanies. Sometimes he watches me paint for long minutes in silence, as if the simple fact that I exist there is story enough. At the end of some days, we walk to the neighborhood cafe and share pancakes, a tradition that started by accident and became our symbol. Speaking of pancakes, every year, on the anniversary of my report, I host something I call the Breakfast of Freedom, a big breakfast in my own home. The first year, it was just Riley, Tessa, Harper, and Maya. The second, more women from the group came. The third, a shelter team joined. By the fifth, the event had grown so much, I had to set up tables in the yard and ask Ethan and some volunteers for help. The pancakes are never just pancakes. They're a reminder that something began on a night of pain, but turned into an annual ceremony of life. At the end of each breakfast, there's always a quiet moment. I stand on the porch watching people leave with their containers, coats, hugs. Sometimes I see new women arriving, looking at the house with a mix of hope and shyness. I remember how I crossed that threshold the first time with Grant and Marisol at my side. Now I cross it differently, with safety, history, and a courage that no longer needs to roar. Even after all these years, I still keep some things from the process. Not out of attachment to trauma, but as a reminder of the road I've walked. In a small box in my closet, I keep the 3:29 a.m. bruise photo. I keep the clear folder where I first stored my evidence. Sometimes I open the box, look for a few seconds, and close it again. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't weigh me down. It's like looking at an old scar. It never fully disappears, but it doesn't rule you anymore. Some days, I catch myself standing in the middle of the house in silence, listening to the sound of fresh coffee brewing, the distant noise of cars outside, Ethan's calm breathing in the next room. And in those moments, I realize something I never would have fit into the woman I was years ago. Peace. Not perfect, cinematic peace. Real peace. Light. Sometimes messy, sometimes quiet, but entirely mine. When I think about everything I lived, everything I lost, everything I found, I see that every piece of my past has a place in my present. Not as weight, but as structure, foundation. A reminder that I went through hell and built something beautiful on top of it. Tonight, before bed, I went into the kitchen. The same kitchen where I made pancakes after the worst night of my life. I put my hand on the cool counter and took a deep breath. And without warning, I smiled. Because I finally understood, freedom didn't come all at once. It came in layers, in breaths, in daily choices, in versions of myself I hadn't met yet. And for the first time, I can say with absolute certainty, I didn't just survive, I started over. And in starting over, I was reborn. And life, my life, has finally, truly begun.